Let's cross now to Buckingham Palace. Our reporter Harry Smith is there. Harry, is there evidence there of people's reactions, these feelings of guilt and anger that we've been talking about here?
I think there's probably evidence of both. I think the overwhelming impression you get if you wander around down here is one of sorrow, one of sadness, one of shock. As you can possibly see, there's still a large crowd here. They've been coming here since before dawn, and they're still arriving. The biggest concentration of the crowd, as you may be able to see, is just in front of that, the main gate in front of Buckingham Palace. There's an area there which the police have set aside. They've put up barriers to keep back most of the crowd, but there is a corridor through those barriers where the police are allowing people to come through and lay flowers. Hundreds of people have been bringing flowers. Some tourists have bought a single rose and come down. Others have arrived with large handfuls of flowers. They're allowed through this corridor. They're allowed to lay their tributes in front of the main gate, to pause for a while. We've seen some tears, and then file off. But there's also a sense of anger. People have been confronting one or two photographers and saying, it's your kind that are to blame. The photographers have been trying to step back and not get involved. There's been no scuffles or anything like that. But there is, in pockets of this crowd, a mood of anger as well as one of very deep sorrow.
Harry, is there the prospect of any kind of announcement there or anything like that? Or are people just coming to Buckingham Palace because they want to be there? They feel that's the place to be today?
I think that's exactly why they're coming, because remember, this isn't even, or wasn't, the official residence of the Princess of Wales. And yet people see Buckingham Palace as the home of royalty. She was the most popular member of that royal family, a very popular member. Walk among the crowd and everyone will tell you why they liked the Princess of Wales. They're coming here partly because there is a crowd, partly to see what's happening, to see if there's any information, partly, as I said, to pay their own tributes to the Princess of Wales. There'll be no announcement as such from Buckingham Palace. I don't know if you can see, there isn't even a flag flying from Buckingham Palace today because, of course, the Queen is not in residence. There's no flag flying, no flag at half-mast. But if you look around from here, look at the roofs of government buildings all the way down Whitehall, you can see the Union flags flying at half-mast. The announcements will come from elsewhere, but as far as a great many people from Britain and abroad are concerned, this is where they want to be today, just to be close to pay tribute to the Princess of Wales.
And Harry, what about the police who are regularly on duty there? What about the soldiers around?
The soldiers have been here as usual. They've been trying as far as they can to carry on duties as normal. We've had the changing of the guard, which always attracts hundreds of people to Buckingham Palace on a Sunday. It went ahead, as it usually does, with one important difference, that the band today played a very moving lament. And it's an event, the changing of the guard, usually watched with some sense of excitement, a bit of theatre. Today, during that ceremony, there was silence. People just stood still. Even those who didn't speak the language and perhaps didn't know what was happening in detail, they caught the mood of the music, they caught the mood of the crowd. So it's been, as far as they can, business as usual, but this is in no sense a normal day at Buckingham Palace.
Harry Smith at Buckingham Palace, thank you very much. Well, Nicholas Owen with me in the studio. I believe you have some news of new developments concerning the funeral.
It was something that Harry Smith said that reminded me that we have heard a little, not an awful lot, I have to say, from royal officials this afternoon, but one of them did say that when Diana's body arrives back in Britain, it will be taken to a private mortuary at an undisclosed destination. But the point was also made that funeral arrangements are expected to be announced by tomorrow at the latest. Now, the suggestion here is that we are looking at obviously a major national event. Now, whether that's going to involve Westminster Abbey and then interment at Windsor, or whether the Princess's body will finally lay at her family seat in Northamptonshire in the Midlands, I don't know. But anyway, that's obviously going to be the next and very, very important thing that people will be taking notice of.
I mean, presumably this is taking some time because there are quite a lot of people to consult.
Oh, immense numbers of people to consult. And the other thing you have to bear in mind is that when it comes to very senior members of the royal family, old members of the royal family, older people, you know, we all know how life ends up. So, of course, lots of plans are laid. Military precision. There's no secret about that. It would be foolish to pretend otherwise. But when it comes to the young ones, well, The Princess was 36 years old in the prime of health, and you know, I very much doubt whether there is much of a plan anywhere for this, and so things have got to be put together and will be put together. This will be a most moving occasion in every sense. The next few days will be handled superbly by those who have to do these things, but it is all being arranged very, very quickly at the last minute.
OK, Nick, thank you very much. Let's move the story on now. French police confirmed this afternoon they were questioning 7 photographers about the crash in which the Princess and Dodi Fayed died. It's not yet clear whether any of them will be charged in connection with the incident. It was the kind of hounding she'd been forced to get used to, but had often resented, not least in recent weeks, as her friendship with Dodi Fayed flourished. Jennifer Nadel now examines the Princess's relationship with the press and looks at what repercussions their apparent role in her death will have.
For the last 17 years, the Princess's every move has been tracked and recorded by the press. Whether trying to take her sons on a family holiday or simply work out in her London gym, photographers and editors alike knew her face, and the fairy tale that went with it would sell. Photos taken on her recent trip to Centerpoint were sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds, boosting tabloid sales and profits. Now her pursuers stand accused.
Mr. Al Fayed believes that this appalling tragedy would never have happened but for the attentions of these people who I suppose we shall have to call photographers. It was quite appalling what happened, and we're just coming to terms with that.
Tougher laws which could have afforded the Princess greater protection were recently rejected. Until now, the government has favoured self-regulation, a position that may change.
I think there has been concern in Britain, in the press and the media, that there should be a line drawn, and that it should be drawn by a responsible press and by responsible media, rather than having it drawn for them by others, with the development of a stronger press complaint system. And I'm certain that that is the right way to go. The paparazzi clearly wouldn't have been pursuing her were it not for the fact that the photographs that she of her that they took earned so much money for them.
Editors also think legislation wouldn't have helped.
France has very stringent privacy laws. They were completely ineffective, both at Saint-Tropez and clearly in Paris. The story about the Prince of Wales, the story about the breakup of the royal marriage, was a worldwide story. It had huge market potential in every country in the world. Even if you banned it in one country, the market would still be sufficiently great to ensure that the harassment continued.
But at Buckingham Palace today, some mourners clearly wanted someone to be held accountable.
But why do they pay so much money for the photographs? Why were the paparazzi after them? If there was no money, in the photographs, they would have been after her in the tunnel.
Whatever the difficulties of legislation, public anger and grief now seem certain to lead to increased pressure for changes to the law. Jennifer Nadel, ITN.
Well, Princess Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, reacted with grief and real anger to the news of his sister's death. This is what he said earlier today.
All those who've come into contact with Diana, particularly over the past 17 years, will share my family's grief. She was unique. She understood the most precious needs of human beings, particularly those that suffered. And her vibrancy and sparkle, combined with a very real sense of duty, are now gone forever. It is heartbreaking to lose such a human being, especially when she was only 36. This is not a time for recriminations, but for sadness. However, I would say that I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case. It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today. My heart goes out to the families of the others killed in this incident. Above all, my thoughts are with William and Harry, and with my mother and 2 sisters, who are showing tremendous bravery in the face of senseless tragedy. I would ask you please, at this time, to respect the fact that Diana was part of a family, and amongst the general mourning at her death, realise that we too need space to pay our final respects to our own flesh and blood. For that, we will need privacy. Finally, the one consolation is that Diana is now in a place where no human being can ever touch her again. I pray that she rests in peace. Thank you.
Some very tough words there from Earl Spencer, Princess Diana's brother. Well, we cross now to Washington and our correspondent there, John Irvine. John, what are they saying over there about the princess's treatment at the hands of the European press?
Well, Dermot, firstly, if I could just begin, we're hearing reports here that Hillary Clinton will be attending the princess's funeral. Those reports are unconfirmed at this stage, I have to say. If I can bring you back to President Clinton's statement at Martha's Vineyard, he also went on to say, "For myself, I will always be glad that I knew the princess and always think of her in a very strong and positive light." Responding to a question about press intrusion and privacy, President Clinton said, "I think it is better right now if we let a little time pass. Let this event and the people involved be honoured and grieved." Now, going back regarding the reaction of the American people in general, the British Embassy here in Washington has issued a statement saying, "We are deeply touched by the many messages of condolence received from all over the United States."
That announcement that Hillary Clinton is going to attend the funeral, is that a sign of the kind of close relationship that the two women had formed?
Very much so. When Princess Diana was here in June, she had a private meeting at the White House with Hillary Clinton. The two women were close. President Clinton was, of course, speaking for an entire nation, a nation that was in love with Princess Diana. Before she came on the scene, the royal family was regarded as somewhat aloof, perhaps even somewhat anachronistic. She changed all that. She was, of course, a regal figure here. She was elegant, statuesque, but she also possessed that great human quality. She was down to earth. She could empathise with people from many walks of life. Now, the idolatry, the way they adored her here was unquestioning. There was no doubts about Diana here. There was never any suggestion that she was out to exploit or manipulate the media in any way. There was no scepticism about what she did for humanitarian causes. People here saw her as a genuine person, a celebrity who used that celebrity, her contacts, to try to do good in the world.
Now, John, you watched that statement from Bill Clinton in its entirety. Would you say he was genuinely shaken?
Very much so. The entire country is genuinely shaken. Such was the adoration for this woman. You and Nick Owen were talking a short time ago about the assassination of President Kennedy. Many people, many Americans saw Princess Diana in the same light as President Kennedy's widow, Jackie, a glamorous woman with a common touch, and yet also a tragic figure. Any time the princess came to the United States, she was embraced by a people that had great sympathy for her, a people who didn't quite understand why she came under such flack from the press in Britain. There were, of course, many Americans who hoped and wished that if she chose to leave Britain, she would come and settle here in the United States.
John Irvine in Washington, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's just discuss this issue of press intrusion a little further with Nicholas Owen with me in the studio here. Nick, press intrusion very much to the forefront of this tragedy. There's been a new development on
yes, we're getting a word here that, I mean, we don't know how much credence to place on this, but let's tell you what the wire says. Pictures of Princess Diana entangled in the wreckage of that crash are being offered around the world for over £600,000. This is quoting a man called Steve Coz, who's editor of the American supermarket tabloid The National Enquirer. The News of the World also says, that's the newspaper here of course, that a French photographer is trying to sell pictures of Diana trapped in the car for £200,000. Mr. Coz particularly is saying he urges the world's press to join the Enquirer in boycotting publication of the pictures. Well, this is a frightful thing. Now, maybe it won't turn out to be quite the case. There's a lot of money and nonsense gets talked in this field, but this goes to the heart of what we've just been talking about, what John's been talking about, what we heard Simon Jenkins saying earlier on. The market, the rewards are so great that reason and decency get thrown to the winds, and that sounds like to me like the most ghastly example of it.
This would be the real test, though, wouldn't it? I mean, if any paper, magazine, anywhere in the world dared to print pictures like that, if they exist, surely there would be universal revulsion.
Yes, I can't. It's very, very hard to imagine that anybody would publish them, but human nature being what it is, I wouldn't like to take an absolute bet on that, Dermot, to be quite honest. We don't know any more than that, but it is Mr. Coles and the News of the World claiming that there are photographs available.
OK, well, we'll have more on that if we get it. Well, the Queen and the Prince of Wales were woken in the early hours of the morning at Balmoral with the terrible news of the Princess's death. Determined to cling together, the whole royal family, including Princes William and Harry, attended a church service there a few hours later. Shortly afterwards, Prince Charles set off on his trip to Paris to accompany Diana's body back to Britain. Our reporter David Rose has spent the day at Balmoral.
Balmoral Castle, where the dreadful news arrived in the small hours of this morning. Balmoral Castle, where sometime around 4, the heir to the throne had to wake his 2 sons and break the news that their beloved mother was dead. The media and the police started gathering at the entrance to the castle, hardly believing what they'd heard, and then tourists, foreign and British, who came to see the royal family and to pay their respects. Promptly at 11:30, 3 royal black limousines swept quietly across the River Dee from the castle, down the drive. The Queen Mother was in the first car. Prince Charles and Princes William and Harry were in the second. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh in the last. They crossed the main road and drove up the hill, disappearing under the trees to Crathy Church. In the church, the service never mentioned Princess Diana by name, but the minister offered prayers for all those whose lives had been darkened by tragedy and grief. Then, after an hour of worship and prayer, the cars came back from the little church on the hill. The 2 princes were sitting on either side of their father in the back of the car. Afterwards, the Queen's domestic chaplain spoke about the service.
We prayed for the royal family, as we always do every Sunday, but today especially we prayed for the Prince of Wales and for the children in particular, and asked that God's blessing would be with them, and that they would know his peace, and that they would know not only of God's love but our love.
Just 3/4 of an hour after the service, 2 much smaller cars drove out of the castle. The Prince of Wales was at the wheel of the first, special branch officers beside him and in the car behind. The Prince drove 50 miles straight to Dyce Airport just north of Aberdeen, where a plane of the Royal Squadron was waiting. That took off immediately on the flight to Paris. The Prince would have 3 hours to compose himself for what lay ahead. At this moment, the whole royal family, with the exception of Prince Charles, are in Balmoral Castle behind me. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh and the 2 princes are expected to make their way south later today, but so far we have no details. David Rose, ITN, at Balmoral.
Well, live now to David Rose at Balmoral. David, we know about Prince Charles going to Paris. We heard you talking there about the 2 young princes. Any news of any other royal movements?
No news, but I think we can gather at least 2 things for sure. One, there was a huge police and special branch presence earlier today when the royal family went to church. There are no police, or virtually none, around at the moment. Therefore, I think a departure is not imminent. Secondly, I'm sure what will decide how they move, when they move, is the benefit, what the needs of the 2 young princes. And one rumour, and it seems to me to make a kind of sense, is that Prince Charles, after escorting the body of his former wife back to England, will come north again to be with his sons, perhaps to bring them to London. But we don't know.
OK, David, thank you very much indeed. David Rose at Balmoral there. Well, Ron Allison, a former press secretary of the Queen, joins us in the studio now. Ronald Allison, we know that Prince Charles is due to arrive with Princess Diana's sister in Paris pretty soon now. What must be going through their minds?
It's always very difficult to speculate on what's going through somebody else's mind, but I think it's safe to assume that they'll all be thinking that this is the last journey in the world they ever would wish to have taken. Numbness, sort of the shock and the horror that they will have been feeling since first thing this morning, that perhaps is beginning to wear off, and now reality is bearing in on them, and I mean, as I say, it's always dangerous to put oneself in anybody else's place, but we can just imagine the feelings as they drive to the hospital, and the reality strikes home.
Now, in your time with the royal family, you had many dealings with the press. When Earl Spencer says that he knows that the press had a direct hand, as he put it, in his sister's death, is he right?
I'd need to ask him. I'm sorry if I'm sounding evasive. I don't quite know what he means by that.
Well, clearly he's in shock.
Yes, he's speaking very emotively, as one would expect. I think at times of sudden death and bereavement, there's always the feeling on the part of those that are left to strike out at somebody. Somebody is to be blamed, or somebody is responsible. So I can't really say exactly what he had in mind when he was using those words. It's a fact of life, of being a public figure these days, that the press are going to pay you intense attention. That we've been discussing throughout the day is the case. The Princess and others like her will not manipulate the press, but will use the press to further the causes which they hold dear. We know, again, what those have been in the Princess's case. They then find it difficult sometimes when they can't tell the press to go away. I'm now closing the door, as it were, and I'm now going into my private world. Maybe they should be allowed to do that, but that is just not the way of it. And when it's the constant pressure on the private life as well as on the public life, that's when it can seem almost unbearable. Going back to my own very much gentler days in the 70s when I was press secretary there, it was still very difficult at times to get the press to draw a distinction between the public and the private parts of people's lives. But I must say that I always drew a distinction, and I'm drawing it again now, between the staff photographers working for organisations in this country who have editors and proprietors, people who can be approached by Buckingham Palace Press Office, whoever else it may be, and asked to ease off, or step back, or what have you. We saw at Balmoral with the photo call that the Prince had with the two young sons 2 or 3 weeks ago. That took place, and then there was apparently no intrusion, and there was another photo call. It can be dealt with. But when you've got the freelancers, the paparazzi, going for the big money because they know the picture will sell, I really don't know how that can be controlled. And what's possible in the United Kingdom, if legislation is introduced, may not be possible in other parts of the world.
Ron, can we just talk a little bit about the Princess of Wales' legacy? In that famous interview, she talked of becoming the Queen of Hearts. Had she achieved that by the time of her death?
Quite. Again, I don't quite know what she was meaning by that in the fullest sense, but if she was meaning that she was going to devote herself to other people, to good causes, to alleviating suffering, to helping other people understand the suffering of HIV victims, sufferers of AIDS, the homeless, what have you, then she was certainly on her way to succeeding. And part of the tragedy which strikes me about the big tragedy of today is that it's come just at a time when, perhaps in her personal life, but certainly in the other side of her life, she did seem to me to be establishing a style. A year after the divorce, she isolated the charities to which she was going to devote considerable time. She was focusing in on them. She was achieving a very great deal. We'd all thought, if we'd thought about it at all, that landmines were bad things and it would be much better if there weren't any. But now, because of her efforts, the world, or much of the world, is talking about it. President Clinton, or Mrs. Clinton, Hillary Clinton, was saying it was meeting the Princess and hearing her talk about this that made the President think again about landmines. So she had a tremendous impact, and she was well on her way to establishing herself as somebody who could make a difference and who had causes for which not only she cared, but which other people could be brought to care.
And, of course, with so much more potential. Ronald Allison, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's just keep you up to date with some of the information that's coming into the ITN newsroom. Mark Webster has been monitoring developments. Mark.
Well, we now know that with Prince Charles in Paris to collect the body of his former wife, preparations are also underway at RAF Northolt near London, where they will greet the body when it gets back to the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister, of course, Tony Blair, has made his way down from his constituency Sedgefield to be there at RAF Northolt when the BA 146 bearing Princess Diana's body does actually get back. People have found different ways to sympathise with this event. In Cheltenham, for instance, there was supposed to be a march of 1,000 people celebrating the return of trade union rights at GCHQ. Instead of having their normal band, they decided to do it silently with nothing but a drum playing throughout. Mrs Blair with the children also headed down to London. There's also been condemnation from former Labour Prime Minister James Callaghan about the way the photographers behaved in this incident. He says, and I quote him, "I think most people regard it as disgusting. I certainly do. But I doubt if we'll see any improvement at all in their behaviour." There's also been personal tributes pouring in to the Princess of Wales, one in particular from Elton John, who, of course, she comforted herself at Gianni Versace's funeral. Elton John called it a tragic and senseless death. He said, "The world has lost one of its most compassionate humanitarians, and I've lost a special friend." Terry Waite, too, the former Beirut hostage, has paid his own special tribute to the Princess of Wales, as have many, many other people with high and low throughout the day.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, Princess Diana's most recent high-profile calls, as we were just discussing, which twice landed her in a political row, was that of trying to persuade the world to ban anti-personnel landmines. She was determined to use her influence to bring attention to the suffering that they caused, and in turn help persuade governments to do something about it. Our Africa correspondent Steve Scott accompanied the Princess on her anti-mines trip to Angola. This is his report.
Dressed down and ready for work, a princess swapping glamour for a new hands-on approach to her charity work. In January, she chose war-ravaged Angola to launch this fresh image and put her face behind the Red Cross landmines campaign. The victims she met had no idea who she was. They were just glad somebody was taking notice. They found her visit uplifting. And where others would have been embarrassed, the princess was completely at ease with the serious injuries confronting her. She was, though, quite clearly moved by many of the tragic stories she listened to. At the time, the princess described the trip as humbling, with the effect of hardening her stance against anti-personnel mines. Her visit made headlines worldwide, but also sparked criticism from some British MPs who blamed her for meddling in politics. Somewhat annoyed, the princess replied she was not a politician, but a humanitarian, always had been, always would be. The man who accompanied her in Angola said today her magic had an extraordinary effect.
When the Princess of Wales became involved, suddenly the interest escalated. Journalists who wrote articles about things nothing to do with landmines had to suddenly swat up on landmine issues and learn about the subject, get to know it, and report it. And we saw the reporting of landmines in some of the most obscure journals in the world.
Earlier this month, she took her campaign to Bosnia, taking time to talk to those, many of them children, whose lives have been shattered by the war there. As always, focusing on the youngsters to help publicise the devastation mines have caused and the threat they still pose. The princess knew she'd be followed wherever she went, so she decided to turn that to the advantage of tens of thousands across the world who are in no position to help themselves. Steve Scott, ITN.
Well, we go over now to Downing Street and our political correspondent, Tom Bradby. Tom, is Mr Blair going to Downing Street or going straight to the airport?
We understand that Mr Blair has not, in fact, yet left Sedgefield, and what he's going to do is go to Teesside Airport and fly down to Northolt from there, where he's going to meet the Prince of Wales and then possibly return to his family later on this evening at Chequers. Dermot, I heard you and Nick talking earlier there about arrangements for the funeral. We haven't heard anything official, of course, and may not for some time, but there is speculation that officials are working towards next weekend. They're looking at that kind of timescale. There's even a suggestion that it may actually go beyond that and not be this week at all, but in fact at the start of next week. Now, got nothing official to confirm that, but that certainly seems to be the kind of timescale that the palace is working on. Now, that poses certain practical difficulties for the government. They're, of course, they say they're waiting to hear what Buckingham Palace have got to say, and it's really a matter for them and the family. But, of course, there are practical implications politically for that kind of timescale, and the obvious one is the question of the Scottish referendum. Now, they've pretty much ruled out changing the date of the referendum, because that would mean recalling Parliament and putting through another bill with a different date, and they're briefing very heavily that they're not likely to do that. But in the meantime, they've got this difficult question of completely suspending campaigning in Scotland. They've already made it clear that they are going to suspend campaigning, but of course the referendum's not very far away, and there's an awful lot of activity going on. There are adverts on television, there are adverts on posters, so they've got to make that difficult judgment about exactly what to stop.
Tom, if MPs aren't sitting, how will Parliament express its condolences?
I think individually, we've already had today a number of MPs and a lot of very senior politicians expressing their shock and sorrow. It's very difficult to get a sense of what might potentially happen this week at the moment, because I think today, I mean, just talking to Downing Street officials, I was walking down the street with one of them earlier, and there's just a palpable sense of shock at what's happened, and it's very difficult to see beyond that. I mean, there's the whole question of privacy legislation, and we've talked about that. There's the question of the funeral arrangements. There's the question of the practical considerations of the referendum in Scotland. There is the question of whether Parliament might be recalled, but as I say, they've ruled that out. But at the moment, they've said a fair amount today, but their attitude now, if you like, is, well, we've said all we can. I mean, really, it's a question of getting over the shock at this stage, and then perhaps tomorrow looking beyond that. And I mean, the Prime Minister has in fact cancelled, or is in the process of cancelling, all his engagements tomorrow. He had a number of engagements, a meeting with the CBI and so on. That's clearly not going to be appropriate. There's clearly going to be a lot of work in making the arrangements for the funeral, so it looks as if he's going to cancel everything tomorrow at this stage.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. And just to let you know, we have picked up on the news wires here in the studio that Prince Charles has arrived at a French military airport just outside Paris, presumably now making his way to the hospital.
Villa Coublay, the name of that airport.
Thanks very much, Nick. Well, the Princess made an immeasurable contribution to good causes around the world, but she was also a world leader in another field. Widely regarded as one of the most beautiful women in the world, her elegance and style made her an icon of the fashion empires. Today, designers and fashion writers join together in their tributes to her. Ben McCarthy reports.
From the moment she appeared in the public eye, Diana was destined to become a fashion icon. At first she was shy and seemed uncomfortable in front of the cameras. But after her fairy tale wedding, in a dress which dazzled the world, Diana became the focus for fashion, with the kind of appeal no supermodel could match.
Many of the designers owe their entire careers to her.
Without doubt.
Without doubt. She was fantastic.
She was the ambassador, when she, as a royal princess, the ambassador for British fashion around the world. And because of that, and because she was dressed beautifully and looked wonderful, buyers from all around the world came to buy from British designers.
And designers knew the world was watching Diana. Her clothes were breathtaking, and sometimes almost daring. But as well as the acclaim, there was criticism. Some frowned on the slicked-back hair she sported at the New York Fashion Awards. But even when she was making mistakes, the followers of fashion adored her.
I don't think we've ever been known as a particularly stylish nation, and she single-handedly rather changed that from, starting as a nursery school teacher, looking, you would never notice what she wore, to being somebody that we cannot take our eyes off her.
In June, Diana parted with many of her dresses at a charity auction in New York. Most will now become museum pieces. It was an act in which her love of fashion combined to help those for whom she cared. Ben McCarthy, ITN.
Just to keep you updated on developments, we're now getting reports that Prince Charles, after landing at a military airport just outside Paris, was driven straight into the centre of Paris without any ceremony. Right, we're joined now by Hilary Alexander, the fashion editor of the Daily Telegraph. Hilary Alexander, we just heard the Emanuels there, who of course designed that famous wedding dress, saying that she was very much an ambassador for British fashion. Is that the way you saw it?
Absolutely. I think she was quite simply probably the most important style icon of the century. She eclipsed anybody else, no matter what she was wearing, whether she was wearing a simple white shirt and jeans to visit war victims, or whether she was in the most fantastic gown and jewellery for a premiere or a big charity dinner. She always looked completely beautiful.
Where did she get this amazing ability to look great in just about anything?
I think it was slightly intuitive. It was probably always there. But I think being in the public eye made her more aware that, it was very important to wear the right clothes for the job. And she seemed to have an instinctive sense to choose something that was eye-catching, that suited her, and was really either sort of very much in step with fashion, if not slightly ahead of it.
She also had this incredible ability, didn't she, to almost start a trend on her own.
Oh, she could. She wasn't afraid of being daring or being controversial in the choice of her clothes. I think we all remember, even on the trip to Australia, when she took us to a family heirloom, I think it was emeralds and diamonds, that should have been a choker, and wore it as the most sensational sort of headband around her forehead. It was little touches like that
She didn't get overly sentimental about the dresses, though, did she? Because, of course, she sold quite a lot of them off for charity just a few months ago.
I think that was also part of the way she saw her new role in life. She didn't want to be seen simply as a clothes horse, and I think she felt that she'd worn the dresses, some of them, you know, many, many times, and perhaps they'd slightly outlived their usefulness in her wardrobe, and they could now do good for others, you know, by being auctioned for charity and then being exhibited in museums so that, you know, many, many other people could see them.
And she certainly did know how to use fashion to her own advantage. One recalls during the Prince Charles programme on television, Princess Diana famously wearing an amazing black dress, which of course stole all the headlines the next day.
Yes, that was by another British designer, Christina Stambolian. And, I mean, it was very, very daring. I think it was probably the most daring dress we'd ever seen her wear. Very short, off the shoulder, quite a bit of cleavage showing. But I think she used fashion to express sort of how she was feeling at the time. And I think she was trying to say, this is the way I am. I feel strong and confident no matter what happens.
And thank you very much indeed. Well, within the last few minutes, the Liberal Democrat leader, Paddy Ashdown, has added his voice to the tributes paid to Diana, Princess of Wales. This is what he had to say.
At this moment, concentrate on one thing, and that is remembering that this is, although a national tragedy, preeminently a personal one, and our first thoughts must be for her close family, the Prince of Wales, and those who were related to her. Our first thoughts, our prayers and our condolences must be with them. The rest can wait until later on. It's difficult even to find a rational judgment about what her life meant. So I think this is a moment for reflection, for condolences, and above all to think of the family themselves.
Paddy Ashdown there, the Liberal Democrat leader, paying his own personal tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales. Well, let's go now to Nicholas Owen, our royal correspondent, with me all day in the studio. Nicholas, you're keeping a close eye on the latest developments. Something new up on the wires.
Well, it was what Tom Bradby was talking about in Downing Street, actually, but sort of fleshing out the details of that. Tomorrow the Prime Minister was going to be having meetings with the TUC and then with the CBI, but he's decided to cancel all of those, and everybody will understand why. There's some discussion now about this business of the funeral, which one moves on to these things. Well, it might seem distressingly quickly, but it's the reality of the situation. But the Downing Street is saying that they expect the Buckingham Palace will be the people to make the announcement about the funeral, and it could come tonight, but it's more likely to come tomorrow, but it could come tonight. Just picking up one thing that Hilary Alexander was talking about, the famous auction of gowns. I mean, one of the most touching things, they've produced this amazingly marvellous brochure, if that's the right way of putting it, of the prospectus of the auction. £30 a time they cost alone, and all the money going to charity, and you opened it, and there inside, signed by Diana herself, was a tribute to her son William, Wills as she always called him, saying the auction was all his idea, just emphasising how much notice she took of her son.
Very interesting point, that the relationship she had especially with Wills, treated him very much as an adult, a confidant almost. A
confidant, certainly. I mean, it was often suggested that in the dark days of her marriage, when she was crying and so on, that it was William the sensitive one, who would go along, knock on Mum's door and go in and say, what's happening now and all that sort of thing. I mean, that won't be so unfamiliar, I guess, to parents who've been in the situation of divorce, but it was always William who cared so very much deeply. I'm not suggesting little Harry didn't, but of course he was so much younger at the time. I think we can go to Buckingham.
Let's take a look at the scene outside Buckingham Palace.
Oh, this is in Paris. We're in Paris.
Presumably is Prince Charles arriving at the hospital. Been whisked past there in a Jaguar, perhaps supplied by the British ambassador. There we have the front of the hospital.
Been masses of press obviously out there all day long. Inside that hospital,
there
it's where
the Union Jack.
Yes.
Right, let's see them getting out.
Watching that.
There's President Chirac.
Yes, and of course the Prince of Wales. Those two have become very friendly in recent times anyway, and now meeting under such tragic circumstances. Being accompanied into meeting the hospital staff.
There's the British ambassador just looking round there.
And Diana's two sisters accompanying them, as far as we're aware. Yes, I'm sure that's them there.
guard of honour there. But no formality.
No formality at all. But this was the hospital where there was that desperate attempt to keep Diana alive in the early hours of this morning. Something like 2 hours, it said, were spent trying to prevent Diana, Princess of Wales, from dying.
And as we were discussing with experts in cardiac problems here, them saying that the French, very, very well equipped, reacted very, very fast, did their very, very best to save her.
Nothing could be done. Quite impossible to imagine anybody surviving that accident, I'm afraid. So there is the Prince of Wales, now in the hospital where his former wife died in the early hours of this morning following that road accident.
OK, Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, the Harrods boss, Mohammed Al Fayed, said the death of his eldest son and the princess had been an appalling and quite needless tragedy. He pointed the finger of blame for their death directly at the press photographers who'd been pursuing them. He said Dodi had been a kind, gentle and decent person who'd had a tremendous regard for Princess Diana. Kevin Dunn reports.
Heir to the Harrods empire, Dodi Fayed had a reputation as a millionaire playboy who had dated a string of glamorous women. But in recent years he had played an increasingly important part in the running of the Harrods business and was seen by his father as his natural successor. When his friendship with Diana was made public last month, after the princess's holiday aboard Mohammed Al Fayed's yacht, the media interest in the couple became intense. One of Dodi's former girlfriends, model Kelly Fisher, even surfaced to threaten to sue him for breaking off their alleged engagement. But his friends say his relationship with Diana was deepening.
I knew how sincere he was, and I think that they were enjoying their life together, they were enjoying each other's company, they were getting to know each other. And why not?
Dodi's father, Mohammed Al Fayed, and his brother Ali had come from humble beginnings in Egypt to take charge of Britain's most famous store. His position brought him into contact with royalty, and he apparently encouraged his son's friendship with Diana, though Dodi found press attention intrusive.
He wasn't an angry man. He was still in the throes of developing this relationship with Diana. And that was the main focus, but the press was making it very difficult.
Today, the flag was flying at half-mast over the Harrods store in Knightsbridge as the Al Fayed family tried to come to terms with their loss. Kevin Dunn, ITN.
Well, let's move just down the road from Harrods to Kensington Palace, Princess Diana's London home. Helen Wright is there. Helen, presumably grief to the foremost there.
Absolutely. I don't think I've ever seen so many flowers as we can see here today. They literally line the pavement, piled 10 deep in some parts. And then the line of flowers snakes round the wall, right round the walls of Kensington Palace Gardens. And I don't think I've seen as many people before. I think everyone's been surprised by just how many people have turned up here today. They're lining the road behind me. Everybody's still bringing flowers. The police desperately trying to sort of keep the crowd moving. They're literally blocked off the road here at one point, and everybody just seems to want to be here with other people, to mourn with them, and just to talk to other people about their thoughts and memories about the princess.
Sorrow, as you describe it, clearly the dominant emotion there, but is there any evidence of this suppressed anger we've been talking about?
There is certainly anger towards the media here. We've seen examples of that here today. There was a man in the crowd earlier on who was shouting at the press photographers, "I hope you're satisfied. I hope you're happy now. You shouldn't be here today. You shouldn't be here." And the crowds of the crowd applauded those sentiments. But there are other people who really feel that the press should be here. They should be showing just how strongly people feel about Diana and should be showing the tributes that are being paid to her today.
Helen Wright at Kensington Palace. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Mark Webster now in the ITN newsroom with the latest developments.
Yes, well, as you were saying earlier, the effects of Diana's untimely death have been felt throughout Europe, throughout the world. One of the very latest things I'm just reading from the screen here is the pop star Michael Jackson has cancelled a concert in Belgium today because of his shock at the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Jackson said he would have a difficult time performing and didn't want to do the concert because of her sudden death. In addition to that, the comedian Michael Barrymore, who's one of the last people who had a proper heart-to-heart with Diana, did say after 2.5 hours at Kensington Palace recently, he said, I knew her for a year or two, but even in that time came to realise she was unique. She is irreplaceable. That is among the hundreds of tributes which have been paid, everybody from Nelson Mandela right through to crowned heads, heads of government, heads of state, have been paying their tributes to Diana today for her work for charity and for her extraordinary personality. The latest, of course, we know that is in Paris. Prince Charles is now there. He's at the hospital. He'll be coming back to the base, an RAF base near London, accompanying his former wife's body. And say he will be met there by the Prime Minister. And her body will then be taken to a private mortuary in London. And arrangements are now underway, of course, as to exactly what is to be done for her funeral, on what sort of scale it will be. The government has made it perfectly plain that it will be entirely up to Buckingham Palace to decide exactly how to treat the funeral.
Mark Webster, thank you very much indeed. Well, Nick, we heard Mark Webster there, and we've seen Prince Charles arriving at the Petit-Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. Just fill us in on the timing of his progress from here.
Well, it is said that he's going to be having a meeting inside with the hospital staff, obviously thanking them for the work they did, the desperate struggle, as we were saying earlier, to try to keep the princess alive earlier on. And then the idea is that he should return accompanying the body of Diana together with her 2 sisters, and the plane, the British Aerospace 146 of the Queen's flight, will take off from military airbase Villa Coublay on the outskirts of Paris and a short hop over to Northolt, where they will be met by Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, at about 7 o'clock this evening.
Nick, let's just have a quick look at some of the scenes down there at Buckingham Palace. People almost wandering around aimlessly, almost lost for words.
Indeed, in what looks like a very sunny, bright day. And the weather is extremely inappropriate, isn't it? Because it's absolutely the most dreadful day that has ever been seen, I think, in the gates of the front of the gates of that palace. As we've said, the Queen is not there. She and the rest of the royal family, apart from the Prince of Wales, are up at Balmoral. It's not yet known when they will be on their way back to London, and of course when William, Diana's 15-year-old son, and Harry, her 12-year-old son, when they will be coming back. But it's generally assumed that it won't be any time today. There's obviously no great rush for them to come back, and they've already had the most terrible news to digest. They had to go along to the church this morning, Crathy Church beside Balmoral, the whole royal family there, including the Queen Mother, Queen, Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Charles, and the 2 young princes. In public, there were the boys doing obviously what was seen as duty. But as I say, we don't know when they will be back to London, and we next await the details of the funeral and all the other things that are going to go with it. And we keep on talking about this, but it is going to be a massive national event. I mean, my memory goes back. We all do this, don't we? Depending on our age, my memory goes back to Churchill's funeral, 1965. Yes, one remembers that, the old black and white television pictures so well, and lying in state in that case. The feeling throughout the nation was perhaps a bit the same. Well, it was the same, of course. I mean, Winston Churchill had seen this country through the war and so on, but that is the sort of scale of mourning we're undoubtedly going to see. I think everybody is going to want to have some part of it. They're going to want to show how they feel. Those pictures from Kensington Palace, didn't they show that? People wanted to be there, as Helen Wright said. People want to be at Buckingham Palace at a time like this. They sort of want to go somewhere to show how they feel, to show that it's an overused phrase, the nation united in grief. But I'm absolutely certain that is true at the moment.
As our reporter down at Buckingham Palace, Harry Smith, pointed out, there's a slight irony that people seem to be focusing on Buckingham Palace, given the relations that the Princess had with the Buckingham Palace hierarchy, especially in later years.
Indeed, but still, whatever you say about that, all the ups and downs of Diana's relationship with the royal family, and of course her marriage and subsequent divorce from the Prince of Wales, it is still, when it's all said, the centre of national life.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's cross straight now to Paris. Our reporter there, Robert Hall, has the latest. The Prince of Wales having just arrived at the hospital there. Robert, what's going on?
Well, Dermot, there was very, very little ceremony. A very great contrast to a normal royal visit here. Prince Charles stepped off the plane straight into a convoy. The press were kept well back at the airport. He was then driven at high speed straight into Paris and straight into the hospital behind me. He was greeted formally by the French president. There was a certain amount of conversation outside. He met hospital staff. They've now gone inside for a series of private meetings and discussions. The French president will wish to express his condolences, I'm sure. Prince Charles, I know, wants to talk to members of the hospital staff who worked so hard to try and save the life of his former wife in the early hours of this morning. They should be out very shortly. There will be a certain amount of ceremonial on his departure. There will be a small honour guard of the Presidential Guard, and then the cavalcade, the convoy rather, one vehicle longer with the hearse, of course, will then proceed back to the military airfield just outside Paris. The plane is expected to take off. It's running a little bit late. It was due to take off at around 7 o'clock our time, that's 6 o'clock your time, en route for the RAF Northolt airfield just outside London.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, the royal biographer Hugo Vickers is with me in the studio now. Hugo Vickers, you saw those pictures of Prince Charles arriving at the hospital. The word dignified comes to mind in the way he carried himself.
Yes, absolutely. As always one might say, but also very much noted the little guard of honour, which Robert Hall mentioned, and the President standing there. I trust we'll do the same for her when she comes back to England.
Now, the big question now, what effect is this going to have on the heart of the royal family?
Well, it changes the whole emphasis. What you must remember, of course, is that Princess of Wales was slightly outside the royal family and had been for the last year, just re-establishing, as we've said very often in the course of today, a different role for herself, which was independent of the royal family. But nevertheless, when something like this happens, we remember that she is, after all, the mother of the future king and of his younger brother, and it is that position which is what will be respected at the time of her funeral.
But we've talked about her treatment at the hands of the royal hierarchy, the royal insiders. It's hard to know which way public opinion will go at this point in time, but is it likely that any of the sorrow and the anger and the grief will be directed in those areas, and that it actually could damage ultimately?
Well, I certainly hope not, because I think that what people must understand is that even if a divorce has happened, this doesn't wipe out the good earlier years, it doesn't wipe out the shared family. She is still a mother. As you know, the relations between the Prince and Princess of Wales were always at their strongest when they were parents, whatever their personal differences might have been. I have always felt, in fact, that the marriage might have survived publicly, if not privately, had it not been for the intervention of the press, the stolen tapes and letters and revelations of royal servants, and the continual pressure. Because in this country we have about 12 newspapers coming out each day, all competing against each other and not actually working in the slightest bit in the national interest.
What now do you think in terms of the relationship between the royals and the press? Will the press start to lay off, be almost embarrassed after this, or will the royals put the shutters up?
Well, they won't have Princess Diana anymore, and of course she was this huge focal attraction to them. I'm hoping that, obviously, that they will respect the fact that this family is going through a period of grief. The Prince of Wales now has the role of being the sole parent to those two boys. Sure that everything in his character, his natural sympathy, his introspective streak, and his understanding of young people and things will actually mean that he will fulfill that role, I think, very well. It's not going to be easy for him. It's not going to be easy for his boys. His boys are at a very sensitive and difficult age, just teenagers. That's the worst time. And a very loving and very much a mother who was very much there for them. And I think that's going to be terribly difficult. So they must have a bit of time. And the royal family will, I'm sure, unite to support Prince Charles. And I just hope that, that they could be given a little bit of peace, really.
Hugo Vickers, thank you very much. Well, Diana's death didn't just rob the nation of a princess. As we've just been saying, it robbed her two young sons of a mother. Princes William and Harry were told of her death this morning by their father, Prince Charles, at Balmoral. Princess Diana had never made any secret of the fact that her relationship with them was the most important thing in her life. It was, she said recently, what kept her in Britain. Harry Smith reports.
The two princes, seen here at Balmoral 2 weeks ago, are said to be very different characters who will handle their grief in very different ways. The elder of the two, William, is often described as reserved and sensitive. In public, he usually shows a dislike for the sort of media attention his mother had to learn to cope with. At school at Eton, where he's been studying for his GCSEs, He's said to have blended in well and enjoys being treated as just another one of the boys. His school and the friendships he's formed there could be a source of strong support as he tries to come to terms with his loss. His younger brother Harry is more outgoing, a characteristic his mother is said to have greatly admired. He's a keen sportsman and displays a remarkable degree of self-confidence in public, rarely troubled by the presence of the cameras and often eager to play up to them. Diana, always the picture of the devoted mother, said recently she would have left Britain if it hadn't been for her sons. Now they, who were always going to have difficult childhoods, must face some of the most difficult years of growing up without their mother. Harry Smith, ITN.
Well, I'm joined now by Victor Adebowale, the Chief Executive of the homeless charity Centerpoint, which Diana, of course, took a very special interest in. Victor Adebowale, how did the Princess help your charity?
Well, in a number of ways. Obviously, the fact that she lent her kudos and high profile to our cause was something that helped us maintain the issue in the public eye. But we were always very conscious that it wasn't about the Princess or about the patron. It was about the cause and about the fact there are thousands of young people who are homeless or at risk of being so. And she was very conscious of that. The other way she helped is by just being human and talking to young people and getting rid of some of this stuff that she was surrounded by, and just being friendly and being well with them. And she didn't have to do that.
So she never bottled up her emotions, it all came flowing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, some of the young people that Centerpoint sees have had very difficult times, very difficult circumstances, have been lied to for a long time, and they make excellent lie detectors. And the Princess was able to she was genuine, because if she wasn't genuine, they would have pulled it straight away. And my experience of her was that she enjoyed her visits. She didn't have to laugh with our young people. She didn't have to relate to them, but she did because she wanted to.
And they were far from flying visits. She spent an awful lot of time there. She spent
time with us. She spent time with young people, and we appreciate that.
She did, of course, come from very different backgrounds from many of the young people involved in your charity. How did she empathise with them?
Well, empathy is universal, and I don't think it necessarily requires money or the lack of it. I couldn't tell you where it came from. I think it would be presumptuous of me to attempt to do so, but I think that she had a genuine feeling for their circumstance, and could imagine, I suppose, where they were coming from and who they are, and some of the complications and confusions around their life, which may have matched some of her own.
Do you have any abiding and striking memories of the Princess? How will you remember her?
Well, I'll remember personally, I suppose. I remember her as someone who was a consummate professional. I mean, she was good at what she did, but she was also very human. And I remember being surprised and impressed by my first occasion when she met a group of young people at an annual meeting. She walked straight up to one of them and said to him, "Hello, Joe," and it was either I never figured out whether she was just very well briefed, had the memory of an elephant, but either way she knew that young person, remembered that she'd met that young person before amongst the thousands of people she must meet in any one period, and made a direct connection with that person. And it's something that I won't forget, and neither will that young person.
Now, we've talked an awful lot about the Princess's bad relationship with the press. It was, of course, in her charity work, though, where she was able to harness her power to get the focus of attention on charities like yours.
Well, we at Centerpoint have always relied on the support of the public, and in the support of Diana, Princess of Wales, we were always very careful to keep the focus on the issue, and she respected that. She would, I'm sure, would want us to continue with the support of the public, and she never got in the way of that. And despite some of the more, I have to say, more cynical press statements about her involvement with Centerpoint, we never experienced her as someone who got in the way of the message. And I think she'd want us to continue doing what she helped us do, which is ensure that no young person's at risk because they don't have a safe place to stay.
And how have your staff, the kids, how have they taken this terrible, terrible news?
Well, we're all a bit shocked. We all took it very, very hard, and it still has a bit of a dreamlike quality to it. we obviously have been trying to get round all the projects, and certainly me and my colleagues have rung round all our projects, and we would want to reassure Centerpoint staff and Centerpoint young people that we are here for them, and we'll be there for them tomorrow and the day after that and the day after.
Well, I was talking earlier with some people from the Lighthouse project, where of course she did an enormous amount of work there as well, and they said that this had made them want to redouble their efforts as a lasting tribute to the Princess.
Yes, I think Centerpoint, our relationship with the Princess was always on the basis that we don't give up. This is Centerpoint, and we don't give up. She was very committed to our young people and to the lives that we help to improve. On Monday, it's business as usual. I think it would be lying if we said that we weren't hurt by what's happened. We are hurt by what's happened. We're missing her now. But our tribute to the Princess will be to redouble our efforts, but we will do that with the support of the public, and I'm convinced that that support will be increased as a result of the work that she's done.
Victor, just stay with us there. Nicholas Owen, our royal correspondent.
Victor, I wanted to bring up something I don't think you mentioned, but isn't it true that the Princess did bring her sons to see your charity work? I mean, that determined to bring the sort of future heir to the throne face to face with the grimmer realities of life and the way that you see it.
The fact of the matter is that many of our young people are the same age as of the princes. Both William and Harry met young people who were very similar ages, though obviously very different backgrounds. The future kings of England are going to be the future kings of every one of us, including Centerpoint's young people. The visit was a memorable occasion. It wasn't meant to be a public visit, but it turned out to be one, as many of these things do. It worked well, it went smoothly. There was a communication across the rivers, I suppose, and it's something that I will respect her for.
What was it like on that day? What was the reaction of the young princes to what they were seeing? How did their mother behave with them as well?
With dignity. It was something that we. My recollection of the day was that it went very smoothly. The princes and the princess weren't fazed by what they saw and what they heard, as I would expect. We talked about the issues of homelessness and the realities of life on the streets for many of our young people and the dangers that many of our young people face. I can't say what the impact of the visit was on the princes, and I wouldn't presume to do so. At this time, our thoughts are with them. They're two young people that are going to be devastated by what's happened.
We've talked of the similarities between Diana and her eldest son, William, the future king. Did you notice that similarity of temperament?
No. I mean, I'm the chief executive of Centerpoint. I don't know and didn't know the Princess of Wales as well as I would have liked to, or her sons. What I did pick up on that day was a woman and two sons, close, interested in the issues, wanting to learn more, making an effort to contact people at a human level, and achieving that in some instances. I think that myself and other Centerpoint members of staff were privileged to see such an occasion, and I think many of the young people that met her and her sons on that day will remember it for a long time.
Happy memories, Victor Adebowale. Thank you very much indeed.